So since you put him out, you get 2 life, but he has summoning sickness, so you can't attack until your next turn.
Engage.
Hi guys, today I'm going to be reading you Chapter 3 of A Rock in a Hard Place. I was originally going to do Chapter 3 and 4 today, and I just finished recording it, but it ended up being a half-hour video, and that's way too long to upload, so I'm going to put Chapter 4 up tomorrow. And I just wanted to re-record this little intro to let you know. That's why there's going to be a little awkward cut after this intro, because originally I was going to do it as 2 chapters in one day. But that being said, I hope you enjoy this, and it is actually picking up a little bit now that they've got like the preliminaries out of the way. So it's actually getting more interesting, so I hope you guys like it. Mark Masters stalked around the inside of Jackson Carter's office. Masters fit the description of most terraformers, sturdy, wiry, and grizzled. The soft-soled boots made no noise on Carter's polished floor. Carter simply watched without comment. "It stinks," Masters said at length. Carter nodded agreeably. "There is that. We contracted with the Federation, contracted exclusively for terraforming privileges." "I know we did," said Carter. "I was one of the ones who signed the contract. You're not telling me anything I don't know." "Well, I'll tell you what I don't know. We've been doing a fine job. Sure, it's been going slower than planned, but why in hell do we need the Federation shipping in a monitoring and research group?" "Why not? It's a big planet." "You're kidding, right? 95% uninhabitable, and he calls it a big planet." Masters strode to the window of Carter's office. The office was on the 3rd floor, which was as tall as the building got in starlight. Through the window was a beautiful view of a hell called Paradise. Once, barely years ago, there had been no life on the planet at all. It hadn't even had a name, merely an identification number. Once it had population, life, but that was many centuries ago, and the populace had obliterated themselves through environmental atrocities and pointless wars. To this day, the planet had been uninhabitable by humanoid life. It was the perfect type of planet for terraformers. They had laid their claim with the Federation, guaranteeing that the planet was being developed for colonizing, and that any activity would involve only those intended for benefiting peaceful coexistence. In other words, no making use of the desolate area for developing weapons. The Federation had agreed, and the terraformers, 112 in all, had dubbed their new home Paradise. With the furious winds, perpetual snowfall, hard-to-breathe air, heavily ionized atmosphere, and inhospitable land, it was definitely a misnomer. The first thing had been construction of an atmosphere processing plant, slowly supplying a small area with proper atmospheric conditions. This alone had taken long, arduous months, and the result had been Starlight, the first city on the surface of Paradise, and who knew how many centuries. It was only a few miles square, but there was the definite grunginess about it. But it was home. The buildings were stark and functional, and there was the constant dim haze in the air, a result of the interaction between the reconditioned atmosphere and the natural one. Buildings wore a coat of perpetual grime, and the terraformers had given up trying to keep them clean long ago. Instead, the buildings had names or off-color messages etched in the dirt on a daily basis. By the next day, new dirt and new messages replaced the old. The city had been laid out helter-skelter, which had never been a problem since everyone there knew where everything was. At night, there were glowing, flashing signs on the buildings that summoned the terraformers to the pub for relaxation and recreation. Once Starlight had been established, the skeleton crew of terraformers swelled to its full complement of 112. The buildings had gone up, and scientific research bases were established. Plans were well underway to create other atmosphere centers, other cities. Feasibility studies of networking tunnels for quicker, safer access to future cities were conducted. All of it, however, took time. And there were the setbacks. "It's the Wild Things, isn't it?" said Masters, still looking out the window. "They heard about the Wild Things and they're upset." "No one anticipated the Wild Things," replied Carter soothingly. "A genetic mishap, that's all. They shouldn't have escaped. I'm head scientist. It's my fault." He turned towards Carter. "I'll resign. The Federation is probably looking for a head to roll, and it'll be mine. If I go willingly, me and my family, then maybe they'll—" Carter put up a hand comfortingly. There was something about Carter that radiated calm. He had a thatch of graying hair, a rounded, bearded jaw, and a smile so perpetual that at first you thought he must not have understood the gravity of the situation. but Carter always knew every aspect, every angle. Because of that, he was able to focus on the positive side of things, and he did so without a Pollyanna-like attitude. No heads are going to roll. Everything is going to be fine. The Federation isn't looking to take over anything. That's not how they operate. All they want to do is help. What if we don't want their help? Then we'd be idiots. Mark, this isn't a race. This isn't even a matter of pride. We all have a common goal, Carter said affably. Besides, it turns out the guy who is going to be commanding the Federation team is none other than Commander William T. Riker. Master stared at him blankly and shrugged. Carter let out a sigh and shook his head disappointedly. I've told you about him. The guy I grew up in Valdez with? Carter frowned. I don't remember you mentioning any. Then his face cleared. Wait, the guy you called Thunderball? Right, that's him. The guy who... That's right, the same. Masters grinned. Oh, I've got to meet this guy. You'll like him. He'll hate me. Carter smiled reassuringly. Don't worry, Mark. We all do. The Enterprise cut gracefully through space, her sleekness of movement an apparent contradiction to the massiveness of her build. In the captain's ready room, however, William Riker was feeling anything but graceful. He turned so quickly that he almost knocked over the captain's model of the Stargazer. Transferred, he said again. The word had such a nasty sound to it. Only for a month. It's purely temporary, number one, I can assure you, and certainly no reflection of the job you've done here. Captain! Riker paced the ready room like a caged cat. Picard sat serenely behind his desk, sympathizing with the second-in-command's feelings of disorientation. If this has something to do with your concerns about my overworking... No, Picard shook his head. Obviously, I've not been clear. This is a Starfleet order. They feel that growing up in the rugged terrain of Alaska makes you suited to head a science and advisory team to a terraforming world. I'm not a scientist. Picard's lips thinned. Then you have to advise, won't you? Riker swung a chair around and straddled it. Terraformers are noted for knowing their own mind and not taking well to advice from outsiders. Glancing at the speck on the world of Paradise, Picard nodded slowly. That has usually been my experience with them. However, the leader, Jackson Carter, has a reputation for... Hold it. Jackson Carter? Yes. Why? You know him? Do you have his bio there? All of the pertinent records regarding Paradise and key personnel have been forwarded to Picard. He called up Carter's biography on the screen now. Yes? Birthplace? Picard's gaze flickered towards the appropriate line and his eyes widened. Valdez, Alaska. Picard slapped the table. I don't believe it! Squibby! I take it by the fact that you were born in the same place as Mr. Carter, and that you appear to know him by an absurd nickname, that you were friends. A grin split Riker's face. Good deduction, Captain. Well, I'm a detective in my spare time, Picard said modestly. Riker's thoughts were a million miles and several decades away. My God, Squibby, after all these years. Why Squibby? Because he looked like a Squibby, whatever the hell that was, he said. That kind of face, that kind of personality, everything about him just said Squibby. Someone tagged him with a name and it stuck. That someone being me, Riker admitted sheepishly. He hated the name, too. He got back at me, though, when he called me... His voice trailed off, and Picard, interest piqued, said, Called you what? Nothing. It was silly. Picard had not seen Riker this off balance since number one had learned that Troy had fibbed about Betazoid's sex drive. So often had his second officer seemed endlessly self-assured that Picard could not resist the temptation to engage him in some harmless needling. You don't have to tell me, number one, if you don't wish to. Good. However... I could order you, of course. Riker winced. Captain, I'd really rather you didn't force me to... Force you? Picard seemed shocked, and he said stiffly, Number one, if there is one thing that I can respect, it is my crew's need for and right to individual privacy. Thank you, sir, said Riker gravely. However... Oh, God... Deanna Troi tapped her communicator in response to the page. Troi here. Deanna, it's Bev. Where are you? Deck 8 holodeck. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. It's quite all right. I had intended to just spend some quiet time alone. Oh. Deanna smiled at the pause. Would you care to join me alone? If you don't mind. Not at all. Moments later, Beverly walked in and slowly came to a halt. A dazzling vista spread out before her. The land stretched as far as she could see, rugged and cratered, with vast mountain ranges curving upwards like fingers of a world caressing itself. The sky with a shimmering rainbow, the bands of light actually trembling. Crusher glanced over and saw Deanna Troi sitting calmly, cross-legged, on a narrow outcropping. Deanna was not looking at her, but straight out at the undulating sky. Afraid to say anything that might break the spell, Beverly walked slowly over and sat down several feet behind Troi. They remained that way for an undetermined amount of time, for time seemed to have slowed down, or perhaps even vanished altogether. "The singing skies," said Troi at length. "Singing? I don't hear anything." "You could not," was Deanna's reply. "You have to listen to yourself." "What?" "It is a place on my world for thought and contemplation. It provides beautiful harmonies, but only in the mind." She turned towards Crusher, her dark eyes wide. Bev could almost imagine she saw patterns of music dancing behind them. To hear the tune, you must be in tune. Bev closed her eyes, clearing her mind, tried to turn herself inward. Nothing, and out loud she admitted, nothing. No one can hear the music immediately. You must work your way towards that. Hearing the music is a blend of harmony with the world and with yourself. Only when the two are together can the music play within your head. It is a way of testing empathic powers. Bev sensed an incomplete thought hanging in the air. "And how are yours testing today?" Slowly, Troi uncrossed her long legs and stood, shaking out her hair. "The music is faint today," she admitted. "What's the problem? If it's the card game, then I'm sorry. I didn't mean to suddenly wind up taking your place like that." Troi looked at her in amusement. "You took my place?" Bev nodded unhappily. "You did poorly. I don't want to talk about it." "As you wish." Fortunately, the game broke up when Captain Picard summoned Commander Riker about something. Troi slowly sat down, as if she were a doll deflating of air. "He will be leaving." "Who?" "Commander Riker." Bev frowned and sat next to Troi. "How do you know?" "I sensed the captain's thoughts in turmoil, which was the reason I left the game. The captain told me what was happening and asked me not to speak to Will of it until he had." "And has he?" Troi seemed to be reaching outside herself once more. "Yes, and Will is ambivalent, but he will go. It is what he must do." "And how does that make you feel?" "That does not matter." "It does to me." Troi smiled at that and patted Bev's hand. "You know, for so long I did not see Will, and I thought I had put him out of my mind. Then we met again, and it was like that time apart had never happened. And yet it did. It was so frustrating. All of it is." "All of what?" "All of everything. O'Brien, for example. He didn't want me in the game because he thought I could not control my empathic powers for something as routine as a poker game. That is how humans are, Beverly. Their thoughts are their private refuge. They think things that they would never dream of acting upon. So when they encounter someone who can sense their thoughts, they become frightened of that person." "I'm not frightened of you," said Bev. "And the captain, my God, he depends on you. He's come to know me and trust me. But many others on the ship, I'm a mystery. They don't know what my capabilities are. They don't understand, for example, that if they don't want me to know what they're thinking, I can be blocked. And I receive empathic feelings only if I do certain mental preparation. It can't happen accidentally. Empathy is a cooperative endeavor, not a mind rape or something. Give them time. They'll come around. People are only nervous about things they don't fully understand." Bev smiled. "It was only a few centuries ago that, if there was something unknown, humans would automatically deal with it in one of three ways: kill it, pollute it, or try to make money from it. We've progressed far beyond that, thank heavens. But no matter how far we come, it only seems to indicate how much further we have to go." Troi nodded at that as she continued to stare out at the lights. The rainbows danced in the luminous darkness of her eyes. Troi stared out also, straining her hearing. Still not so much as a note. "I would really love to hear the music," she said. "Try for something easier first." "Like what?" "Your heartbeat. You're a doctor. When you can hear your heartbeat, that will be the first step to hearing the music of the singing skies." She smiled, not to mention winning at poker. Riker was in his quarters packing his gear when there was a tone at the door. "Come," but he already knew who it would be. He nodded to Deanna as she stepped in. The door hissed shut behind her. "Word spreads quickly, Counselor." "News has a way of traveling aboard a starship." "A very formal way of putting it," he smiled. She walked toward him and then veered off slightly and sat in a chair nearby. It sounds very rugged where you're going. It is. We all shall miss you. He placed 2 more shirts in his bag. You took an opinion poll? I shall miss you. Ah. He turned and grinned widely at that. Well, missing me shouldn't be all that difficult. We had a stretch of years when we didn't see each other at all. Are you under the impression, Commander Riker, that you occupied my thoughts every day of our separation? She said teasingly. Of course not, was a stiff response. After all, I never thought of you. Nor I you. A smile played across his lips. Then, what he wanted to say flashed through his mind. He did not speak, of course. He could not say to her, I never thought of you, not your silken hair or sweet voice. I never thought of the tender caress of your words, the dark eyes you can get lost in. Never for a moment did that cross my mind. She walked toward him slowly, then several feet away she stopped, her arms folded. She made no reply, for he had said nothing, merely smiled in that way he had. Thoughts flitted across her mind, which she did not voice. She did not say, You were a barely distinguishable memory. I could barely recall the strength of your heart beating against mine, the way your powerful hands could make me feel, the way your eyes crinkled when you laughed. These are but the dimmest flutterings of fast-fading memory. All of it remained unsaid. They stood there a moment, and then Riker stuck out a hand. Troy took it and shook it firmly. Goodbye, Commander. Be careful. I shall continue not to think about you in the same way. Take care, Counselor. Thoughts of you will occupy me no more than they have ever. Light years away, somewhere in the hidden hills of paradise, the leader of the wild things screamed in anticipation. I got the Star Trek companion, so now I can have information and insights on every single episode.